The Great War of One Piece is about to start, and the entire world is on the brink of destruction, and only 4 people could possibly do anything about it. I'm talking about the 4 gods of the One Piece world spoken of in Shandoran legend and the Elbaphian Harley text. But who truly are they? Where did they go? And what was their true purpose in the ancient world? Well, I do think that we finally know a lot more about this after scouring my notes, and let me tell you, I think I'm enjoying the series now 10 times more, if that's even possible, than I have ever before after digging into this. I've already spent a lot of time on the 4 gods of One Piece, and honestly, it's just straight up because I find the concept of them so incredibly fascinating. It's been sort of my personal quest these last few years of theorizing to truly unravel the ancient history of One Piece, and I yearn to uncover the secrets the way that children yearn for the mines. And all of that led to this video that you're watching right now, kind of considered a modern day epic poem of sorts, a theory in 7 key chapters that I believe currently is the story of the 4 big gods of One Piece, who they are, why they existed, and how they will return in the final saga. And I think the best place to start is by talking about what we actually know about these 4 deities for sure. Well, for starters, we do know that there are 4 of them: the Sun God, the Forest God, the Earth God, and then the trickiest one, the Sea God. I say tricky here because it's the only one known by 2 different titles. There is the actual Sea God, and then there's also the Rain God. Depending on who you ask, the Elbaphians or the Shandorans, but I think I know why that actually is. You see, we do know for sure that all of these gods do predate the era of even Nolan, as the Shandorans already worshipped them long before he made his appearance roughly 400 years ago, and it seems that based on the Harley text, these gods were pivotal during the first and second world of One Piece, implying that these 4 beings were at the center, or at least a focal point in these big end-of-the-world situations that happen at least twice in the One Piece past. And I do love me some mythology centered around giant winged gods of destruction, let me tell you that. And speaking of the Harley text and the mural here, we do know that the gods are called out by title directly. In other words, this means that somehow, somewhere, the giants' ancestors or whoever created the murals on Elbaf were around to witness them being in the world. Several thousands of years ago, that is, since the Shandorans also worshipped these gods over 1,000 years ago already. And what I find very fascinating is that all of them appear in very different capacities during these eras, including, by the way, the third world, which is very heavily implied to be the current modern era by Saul during chapter 1138, meaning the era that Luffy is now in. Now, the Sun God, aka Nika, appears during the first and the third world by name. In the first world, it's said that the Sun God appeared after the enslaved prayed, and in the third world, the Sun God dances and laughs, guiding the world to its end. Basically, the Japanese version is a little bit more poetically written, and what is most important is that the Sun God is the only god of all these 4 gods that's written with quotation marks in Japanese, which I think is often forgotten in the English translation. Anyways, the Sun God also potentially appears during the second world, but it's a little bit more tricky since I can't tell if the sun here is what they're describing in the second world section, but I believe that the word sun is being used in place of the forbidden sun or the eternal flame that then of course inspired Vegapunk's artificial mother flame. And I do wonder if that could mean that technically Joy Boy never fully awakened the full powers of Nika. I mean, we do know that he unlocked the same Gear 5 state, but what if the power goes well beyond just that? I would personally love to see a flashback with Joy Boy in Gear 5 only to then reveal Luffy ascending even past that level, breaking his own peak and achieving a form that Nika or Joy Boy never could fully reach. I mean, that could be a really fun and interesting twist, truly making Luffy out to be unique even amongst the gods. But it could also just mean that Joy Boy awakened the Nika Devil Fruit, but Nika himself as a real person or a real character did actually live in the first world and might come back in the third world, and you know, the Devil Fruit kind of is more of a copy of his powers, if you get what I'm saying. Next up, we have the Earth God, who only appears in the text during the first world. It says, the Earth God raged, and then teamed up with or harnessed the power of the Hellflame Serpent to shroud the world in death and darkness. Kind of very edgy if you ask me, but I also kind of live for it. I wish I had a Serpent of Hellflame to shroud the world in despair with me as well. That sounds kind of fun. even romantic, one might say. After that, we have the Sea God and the Forest God, who both only seem to appear in the second world of the Harley text, where the Forest God tames the demons, but it actually in the Japanese original says send forth the demons, right? And then after the sun is slain and man became God, the Sea God rages. Very similar, by the way, to how the Earth God rages in the first world. Now, it is unclear if that rage is in response to the sun dying, or if the rage is used to describe this god going absolutely crazy and wild once the sun is no longer part of the equation. There's a lot here, a lot of possibilities, and literally I've only described like 4 lines of text for these guys at best. The other biggest thing surrounding the gods in this Harley text seems to be the final section of each stanza, which says they will never meet again, or they can never meet again, ends the first and second worlds, whereas the third features the line, they will meet again. Now, I believe that they here is being used to describe the gods. I mean, it just makes by far the most sense to me considering the subject, the main characters of the mural and the Harley text. Like, this seems to imply that all of the 4 gods, or at least some of them, will reconnect after the third world meets its end and we kind of go into the 4th age of One Piece. Which I gotta say, pretty sick. I mean, I would love the idea that Luffy will get to meet or maybe team up with other godlike features just like him, but I guess it could also mean that they'll just battle, and that's a lot scarier, honestly. But I think that since this line comes after the world has already ended, you know, the gods here will probably become homies. No, not those homies, sorry. Okay, I forgot their, maybe Prometheus, I don't know, he can stay. I gotta talk about that later. But something else I wanted to draw an interesting connection to is that this is actually not the first time in the series that we've seen this line. In fact, we have heard it a few times in the exact same context. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you will know where I'm going with this because, of course, everything ties into my favorite song, Bing Sake somehow. In Bing Sake, in the English official, the translation used is waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again. But that's not actually very accurate, not to say it's completely wrong, because if you were to translate this line from Japanese more accurately, it reads more akin to the waving shadow, they can't meet anymore. And also when I say they, that's not exactly accurate because in Japanese it doesn't exactly say who's talking about what, it's kind of always context-based. So it might as well read as I, implying a potential first-person POV for the song, which makes a lot more sense since the song is framed as a direct reading from one person to another. Now, I have theorized before, like in this video here, that Bing Sake is the tale of Joy Boy, and this line matching up with the Second World Harley text only further boosts that idea, meaning there could have truly been gods around during this past era, and that is really cool to think about, don't you agree? I mean, I've always kind of assumed that it was, you know, first Nika versus Imu, then Joy Boy versus Imu, but don't you think that the idea that there were 2 other incredible powerhouses in the mix on the same level isn't fun? Like, to me, that sounds super sick for some reason. Can you see why I love these gods so much in the series? I hope you do. Now, I do know that we don't have a ton of info on them on paper, but seriously, in such few words, Oda has created a massive world and an even bigger quest for us. What I'm saying is that we need to learn the origins and the goals of each of these gods to truly understand the entire series, as well as its major themes, and today I think I've inched a little bit closer to unraveling the whole damn thing here. Gods, I love my job, and I love this show. So, with the information covered about the 4 gods, what can you and I here actually piece together about them? Let's dive into that. And I think that the best way that we can actually break this down is to go god by god, covering any other things about them and theories that do make a lot of sense, and then once I've broken it down for you, I'll bring the ideas together and talk about their general place in the mythology, what I think happened to all of them, and how they may have been connected or potentially opposed to each other. And let's save the Sun God for a little while and start instead with the Earth Gods, because they do appear in the first world and seem to be a massive central character of the first One Piece world. God has some very specifically pointed out connection to the Hell Flame Serpent, which I'm pretty safely assuming, I hope we agree, is this giant fire-breathing snake on the mural, right? And that this god destroyed the first world alongside with it or in a battle with Nika. Also, it does seem as if the Earth God enslaved the people who pray to the Sun God, right? And so I kind of get the vibe that the old Earth God here was probably not a good person, you know, in the traditional sense of the word. Which is why if I were a gambling man, which I am, I'd make the bet that the Earth in the series is potentially Imu. Now, I do know that everyone and their mom likes to try and draw a connection to Imu and the sea god because Imu's name is Umi backwards, the Japanese word for the ocean, and the sea devil and all these things. And this is a point to be considered for sure. We'll get more into that idea. I'm not denying whatsoever, but I do think that when we really think about it, narratively, it makes so much more sense for Imu to be the Earth God because their name is Umi backwards, making them the opposite of the sea. The Earth. They live on literally the biggest piece of Earth, the biggest continent in the entire world, the furthest away they can get from the ocean. Also, something that we do see in the series is Mu referring to themselves as a god and then also dominating people's minds and bodies with the Domi Reversi. Using their powers, but also just as a celestial dragon, they very literally enslave people, and one of the prime targets is Loki, who seems to have the eyes of the Hellflame Serpent. I don't know, at least that's the vibe I get when I look at Loki's creepy eyeballs. I mean, I say creepy, I love them, they're cool, but these are definitely snake eyes, that's for sure, right? And so to me, this does suggest that Imu might be the original Earth God, or maybe like a reincarnation of them, the way that Luffy is the reincarnation of Nika. Honestly, I think either works here. I wouldn't be mad either way, but I'm very confident that this Imu has been around at least since the Void Century, and so I wouldn't be too surprised if they were around ever since the original first world even started. Also, something that I want to discuss real quick here about the Earth God, regardless of if they're Imu or not, is the debate that I've had around their title, the Earth God, because I'm not quite certain of why they are that god specifically. Actually, to be fair, this does apply to the Sun God a little bit as well, which makes sense since these two are diametrically opposed. So why specifically Earth in this case, right? I mean, the logical answer would be that they either ruled over Earth like a god, especially because the Sun God doesn't seem to use flames or nova blasts or some crazy solar freelancer. God, too bright. Technically though, the Earth God still just quite literally control like rocks and lava and I don't know, geology, maybe even geography too. Imu does be crossing off islands on the map, geography wizard style, just saying. Now that one, I can rock with it, pun totally intended, and it does make sense that someone controlling the element of Earth would be called that, and it would line up pretty nicely with the Hellflame Serpent potentially being this under the crust lava type dragon thing that might be now imprisoned or, you know, like saved for later, I guess, within the Red Line where Imu's living. But on the other hand, if their title is in reference to being the god of the planet Earth, especially with all the planet shenanigans with the Gorosei, well, damn buddy, there's a very big glaring issue right there. And that issue is that the One Piece planet is technically not Earth. All right, so I don't know how to break this to you One Piece Earth truthers, but no, yeah. Oda has never even once called the One Piece planet Earth. In fact, he goes really far to make it a point to only describe it as the Blue Planet during the series. And recently reconfirmed this in the SBS for volume 111, one volume before this is 12, and the first key moment of it was in NL's cover. Came down from the moon to the blue planet after the moon ran out of resources. And why do I keep saying the moon with such a weird tone, huh? Why me? Well, it's because Oda actually calls the moon the Earth. What a crazy guy. NL's cover story reveals that he was searching for the Fairyverse, which was a legendary land of dreams and was a folk legend to the Birkins. But the literal translation to English is actually the Endless Earth, which, as we know, the Skypians are used to calling Earth or soil Verth, which adds a slightly extra layer of confusion to the mix, probably on purpose. And I think this is a particularly interesting point because the moon is also depicted in the first world and in the mural, which may be a subtle nod to the fact that the moon was where they were actually first coming from, and now we see them harvesting their new planet right here. In other words, NL, as he says himself, wanted to go back to the place that his people rode off, only to find a desolate and harvested planet. Is actually kind of funny when you really think about it. I don't know, maybe this is just my humor. I will say Enel also helps kind of double down on the idea that the gods are from outer space because he claims to be a god and he's a Birkin who, you know, definitely are from the moon since that moon city is also named Burka. I don't know. It's something to consider that this god may not even be the god of the planet that, you know, the characters are currently on, but that's something I went in a little bit more detail with in my Did I Get the Harley Text Wrong video that proposes another fun idea for some of this god stuff. For today, this is just a fun fact to point out here because it could be very relevant with all the planetary shenanigans going on with the Gorosei and the celestial dragons from outer space, and you know, Imu could be Earth. Moving on though, next up on our god introspection is the sea / maybe and or rain god. And this one is particularly fun for me to talk about because it's possibly the god that we heard about first in the series overall. And that's because I think there's a really good case to be made about the sea devil also being the sea god. In case it's been a hot minute for you rereading the early chapters of the series, we did learn that the sea devil punished devil fruit users by making them lose their ability to swim for harnessing his powers in chapter 19. More than 1,100 chapters ago. That stuff was truly remarkable. Now, for all I know, the sea devil isn't the sea god. It could be someone else, but I do think it makes a lot of sense based on how Imu describes the D clan as devils that maybe, just maybe, the words god and devil get used interchangeably here, which of course would in some capacity connect this god to the origin of devil fruits. Now, something that also piqued my interest here was the idea that the sea god raged after the sun was killed and man ascended to godhood in the second world. Like, why are you so angry, homie? Do you have a little fling with the sun or what's going on here? Or were you just amped that the dreaded sun was preventing you from letting loose, and in their absence, you went kind of crazy? I honestly don't know which one makes the most sense here, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably go with the anger in response to the sun's death. I don't know, to me it kind of seems like the second world's flood may have been the gods punishing man for their hybris, kind of like in the Bible. I mean, flooding the world so that they'd have to reset everything again. As for why the sea god is also called the rain god, and I'm particularly talking about this panel here from the Nolan flashback on Shandora, I do think that's literally just a matter of perspective. I mean, the sky races, people who knew the nature of the actual gods, were the ones who called it the rain god. And seeing as on the mural's left half we quite literally see massive raindrops being summoned in this final war, I do think the rain title might be the correct one here. It could be that the sea god title then came from the fact that they caused this mighty flood through intense rainstorms during their big rage that then turned the One Piece planet into what we see today with the raised sea levels, and that's why the giants, people from the blue planet, called them a sea god instead, because they created the seas, you get it. But what if I told you I might even know who this sea god might have been in the story right now? Well, I do have an idea at least. Thematically speaking, we've now gotten a figure who, you know, is threatening to Imu, a person who called themselves a god and in my eyes is probably the Earth God, a figure who has deep ties to the dark depths of the ocean, storms, supernatural events on the sea. We're talking about Davy frickin' Jones. Now, Davy Jones's locker is used in place of the abyss, the dark depths of the ocean, a threat to all seafarers and pirates. And this figure is worshipped by none other than Rox D. Zebek. And he made that very clear to Imu when visiting him kindly in his flower room. Now, through this godly lens, it almost seems like Zebek may have been chump-checking Imu, essentially saying, "You're not my god, the real strongest god is the sea god. My god, Davy frickin' Jones." And then he just dipped from a rejoin, right? I actually just will love to see this interaction play out like a childhood fight where like, my god is stronger than your god. No, my god is stronger. I was like, Rox like kicks sand in Imu's face and tells them that their mom dresses them funny too. Got him. All right, back on track. The weird interaction with Rox in chapter 1155 actually makes me think that Imu has maybe even trapped the sea god and is now accessing their power, the power of the abyss, to teleport around the seas and do all these crazy shenanigans. And seeing as the ocean abyss is quite literally what Davy Jones's locker is an analogy for in real pirate law, I mean, it's just something to consider consider, as this might even be what Zebek and Blackbeard's true goal is, freeing the captured sea god, Davy Jones, from the control of Imu. But there's actually also a chance that Davy Jones isn't the sea god, and instead he might have been a completely different god. So let's talk about that guy. Maybe the most mysterious of them all. What do we know about the forest gods? Well, we do know that they brought forth devils, which is the most accurate translation, as we talked about at the beginning of the Second World, and that's kind of it. But this line alone raises a ton of questions. What does that even mean? Are they literal devils? That could make a ton of sense, and it could be the case that Imu, the Earth God, is harnessing both the powers of the Sea God and the Forest God to pull off moves like the Domi Reversi, teleporting with the Abyss, etc., and maybe why they like their garden. But another big and obvious connection would be that the Forest God brought forth devils, and the literal power system of the series turns out to be devil fruits. Fruits bear on trees. Trees grow in the forest. You get the idea. The forest god bringing forth the Akuma, as it's written in the, text, the devils, could just mean that the forest god created the devil fruits. And I think this is a pretty safe bet regardless of if Imu is or is not controlling them. And I think that's what most people would jump to as an explanation for it, bringing forth the devil line, specifically because it's the forest gods. Now, the reason I brought up Davy Jones is that Imu actively calls the D-Clan the devils during their confrontation with King Cobra. And this by itself once again forms another very unique thread, which could be the will of the devils, which could also be the will of Davy Jones, as we've seen a prominent follower of his, Roxy Zebek, has some serious beef clearly with Imu. They've got some stuff going on. Now, if Davy Jones is the forest god, the creator of devil fruits and the founder of the D-Clan, then it might explain a lot of Roxy Zebek and Blackbeard's motives. They chase down these powerful devil fruits and want to conquer the world. They simply could be doing so because their god, Davy Jones, quite literally made the devil fruits to stop the Earth God Imu. But if Davy Jones is more logically the sea god, I think there are a couple of names that could be the true identity of the forest god too. I mean, Adam and Eve make a lot of sense, since the Eve tree has always been associated with the devil fruits from an etymology standpoint, and also the fact that we don't see any devil fruits growing on the Adam tree. Eve ate the devil fruit of the Bible. Makes sense that Oda would name the Eve tree that if it bore devil fruits. Adam then, as her husband, would be maybe another god name, considering that the Adam tree is the oldest of its kind in the series. But I do think that Nefertari Lily could be another great option here. Now, I'm not the first person to point this out, but Oda might very well have named her after Lilith, the mother of demons from the Bible. And in that case, she could be the one who helped raise the Eve tree, creating the devil fruit, and as we know, she was a member of the D-Clan too. And this could be the true nature of history, and it ties really well in with the idea that Imu is possessing Lily's body potentially. If she's the forest god, well, damn, Imu would have her body, the sea god Davy Jones imprisoned, and only need the sun god to complete this idea of conquering all the gods, right? Which would mean that we should now talk about the boy, the sun god itself, since he does seem to directly oppose the Earth God, and minor detail, but also is Luffy, the main character of the show, in case you didn't know. Now, the Sun God is the only god we do have a name for guaranteed, which is Nika. We love that guy. I'm a huge fan of his work personally. Freeing slaves, pretty cool. Rubbery body, less cool than freeing slaves, but still fun, I'll take it. Insane lore that's generated tons of theories and has kept me busy for hours. I'm quite literally living for it. But the more I look into him, his story, and what we really know about him, the more I actually doubt if he was even actually a real god to begin with. Let's face the facts here. The Sun God is the only god, so far at least, that we do know for certain has a name in the series. But also, Nika is the only one that has a devil fruit based on them in the form of the Hito no Mi model Sun God Nika. Now, two different versions of this god were worshipped throughout history. The giants, the buccaneers, slaves, and the sky races worshipped the warrior of liberation Nika. Meanwhile, later on, we do see the Lunarians, Ming, Zunisha, the Kazuki clan, and even Emeth all have ties to Joy Boy, who is depicted incredibly similarly to Nika, but during the Second World Era. And this means that unlike any of the other gods we've talked about, there are at least 3 iterations of this one godly figure when you count Luffy in the mix as well. The Sun God is the only one that's depicted this way and is very clearly the only one who seemed to reincarnate and reappear in all 3 worlds of the Harley text as well. So what's the deal here? Well, there's something that I do think gets overlooked a little bit in the theory community because the official translation left a key detail out of the Harley translation that I did mention to you earlier in case you paid attention. When you read the English official, he's simply described as the Sun God. But in the original Japanese version of this panel, this is not what he's called in the Harley. Now, in both the first and third worlds, it's written as the Sun Gods with the quotation marks around it, which is really weird and interesting, don't you think? I do, at least. I kind of find it super weird and peculiar that Oda would make a point out of isolating this god so differently from the others, especially in an ancient text. And even more especially when it seems like he's the most powerful, or at least the most important god in the entire show. I mean, I kind of love these little cryptic puzzles, but even more than just that, I love cracking them, or at least attempting to crack them. So why use quotation marks in an ancient text about the history of the One Piece world? In my mind, there are pretty much 2 good reasons to do so. Either Nika is a god, but he is the god of something else, not the Sun God, or what I think makes maybe even a little bit more sense is that Nika isn't even a god at all. He was never a god. He was simply a man who used the sun to defeat the Earth God, which is why after the first world ends, he's never seen again. Instead, Joy Boy, someone who uses a fruit based on the myth of the Sun God, appears instead. And I do think that there's a chance that in this world, there was never a literal sun god to begin with. Instead, it could be that Nika was, again, just another guy who, as the Harley text stated, touched the forbidden sun and harnessed its power for himself to free the slaves of the world, becoming God that way. And while I don't hate the idea that Luffy's not actually the sun god, but you know, I don't know, the moon god or something, it's cool, but I actually would prefer the other thing to be true much more because it would mean that Luffy is still just kind of a dude. He's not the reincarnation of a god, he's just carrying the will of a man who opposed the gods as a mortal, opposed those who controlled others. To me, that would be way more in line with Luffy throughout the series so far. It kind of makes him feel more grounded and less like a traditional chosen one who is blessed by a literal god. Again, I'd be okay with that too, but that'd be even a little bit more fun, I think. Okay, so with each god now individually covered though, I can now show you how they all seem to fully connect. And there's a few options here. I've thought fairly long and fairly hard about this one, trying to crack it, and I still stand by my initial idea that I formed in my 4 gods mega theory here. But don't worry, I'm aware that you might have not seen this one, so let me get you up to speed. These 4 gods, especially from the eyes of the Shandorans, seem to be gods of nature that all surround the ideas of agriculture and growth. We've got the earth, crafted by the Earth God, the land itself that exudes potential. On top of that, imagine a bountiful forest and nature and plants brought to life by the forest god. It's full of rich vegetation, fruits, harvestable plants, you know, wheat, whatnot. Not that type of wheat, but maybe also that type, I don't know. It's wonderful. It could breed a whole new age for man and society, but it needs more. The sun and rain come in to nurture and grow these plants and the earth, creating a beautiful paradise, a beautiful world. You kind of see the picture I'm trying to build here. It does make a lot of sense, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, in the real world, there are tons, and I do mean tons of myths and legends surrounding gods who came down, shared their knowledge with humanity after a great cataclysm, the ability to farm with the world so that humans could grow. I mean, you might have heard about Göbekli Tepe or like other, you know, ancient sites with the Sumerians and the Fertile Crescents that all share these ideas. And those myths do exist everywhere in the world, from the Americas to Japan. You get the idea. And I do think that Oda could be really leaning into all of this and was creating a mythology where the gods came down from space, kind of ancient astronaut, ancient aliens, if you want to, and taught the people of the Blue Planet, the One Piece world, how to grow and thrive alongside nature and kind of broad civilization, which, by the way, we already know there are aliens in One Piece. Oda loves conspiracies, is just what I'm saying. So this is not like some wild idea. And it also lines up quite nicely with all of the sky races. I mean, the first people we see talk about gods and are canonically from the moon, right? Their history is tied to all the gods. Meanwhile, Elbaf mentions them, but only is specifically worshipping Nika, it seems. So this kind of seems to indicate that the earliest religious group in the series was potentially the sky races, excluding the Lunarians, since we never really see them depicted alongside the other sky races. They do seem to be their own mystery and own thing, which is really odd, right? You'd figure that all the sky races would be connected and come from the same place, which to me actually might even hint at the idea that the Lunarians were the gods of the sky races due to their distinctly different wing color and incredible powers, durability, flame control. They were considered the gods in an era before as well. It actually might just make the most sense that they were the humans who touched the Forbidden Sun becoming gods, and according to Marco, Whitebeard once called them the original gods who lived on top of the Red Line, so I do wonder if the true nature of the Lunarians is rising to godhood, not straight up starting with it. And of course then Imu tearing down the old gods and replacing them themselves. But anyhow, back to the gods from space, right? It also ties in nicely to some real world stuff that Oda might very well be pulling inspiration from. Again, a lot of ancient cultures and legends speak of the gods coming down from the heavens, and there are even some tales of them quite literally being from space. Particularly one that Oda does really seem to like and has been depicting a lot with all of these gods and like the murals and stuff are the Anunnaki. Now, in case you don't spend your weekends watching Ancient Aliens or the Y-Files, the Anunnaki are Mesopotamian gods who came down from the heavens with angelic forms who taught the people of the world agriculture, and whose name derives from the god of heaven in that mythology. Now, visually, the style that Oda uses during Skypiea and even a little bit in Elbaf is a lot more reminiscent of these Mesopotamian designs than anything else really in general. And I do think the idea that these gods in One Piece seem to surround agriculture, and Mesopotamia is the birthplace of agriculture and, civilization in the real world, which seems to really connect these two pantheons, fictional for One Piece and historical in our real world, together really well. Nature's wrath seems to be the vibe that Oda is really going for with all of these gods, and I am amped to see all of it. Which I think, regardless of if this agriculture angle is correct or not, is the massive theme that Oda seems to be building towards. I do hope we can agree at least on that. And the One Piece world has a bunch of moments where industry and technology, or technological advancement in general, are framed as bad, dangerous, and hurtful to nature. I mean, Crocodile is a great example of this with his goals for Pluton, and I do think one of the other best examples is, of course, Wano. I mean, the entire arc starts with Kaido and Orochi destroying the country and exploiting it with all the manufacturing and industry, only for the country to then return to its beautiful glory after he's defeated, with a little bit help from Green Bull planting all these crazy beautiful flowers, which is hilarious because that's just not who he is as a person, and I love it. I think that's cool. Oda seems to be building a very key message to me, where I think that the series could be about freeing and or returning the world to its natural state, freeing nature. And the era of the gods and the end of the third world, it kind of seems like Oda could be making a massive commentary on how man's greed ruins world, and how the world, through the gods, is clapping back for that. And it does make sense when you consider what happens in the actual first and second worlds of the Harley text. In World 1, mankind succumbed to greed and touched the Forbidden Sun and was then enslaved, prompting the original sun god to appear. But then, in the second world, they kill the sun and become gods, causing the sea god to rage and probably flood the world, just like in the Bible. And this seems to be a fairly direct commentary from Oda about how developing society and technology too much, using powers you don't understand or control, can cause problems, and the gods will punish you for it. This, by the way, also is really closely tied to two things that Oda does care about. I mean, Japan has this history with nuclear destruction. They've been kind of the victim of all nuclear incidents in history almost, right? When you really look into it, this is obviously a big thing here, nuclear waste and whatnot. And I do want to remind you that Vegapunk's Mother Flame looks a lot like a nuclear reactor. But then we also know that Oda loves Ghibli movies and the work of Miyazaki, right? Ghibli is full. Like, almost every second movie is either about war being bad or technological progress destroying nature and the purity of the world, like the nature around it, or both, right? And Oda loves these movies. The Castle in the Sky, Princess Mononoke, like, they were big inspirations for One Piece, we do know that. And so if this were to be Oda's main message, it would actually explain why Imu prevents the various islands of the worlds from advancing too much, because it almost seems as if the gods are a unified force in preventing mankind from harnessing powers beyond their control that might destroy them themselves. Or maybe not quite unified, but in agreement that they should prevent mankind from using powers that they shouldn't, but all in their own ways. The Sea God punishes Devil Fruit users for coming too close to godhood themselves. The Earth God seems to want to harvest the planet for themselves and prevent the slaves from having that power, and the Forest God brings forth demons that dominate mankind in their own way. Once again, the Sun God kind of seems like the odd one out so far. Maybe Nika is like a Prometheus-like figure from Greek mythology, the black sheep of the gods who actively tries to help humans, and the other gods then punished him for that. I don't know, which, as I mentioned earlier, would also make sense if he was never an actual god to begin with. He'd actually just kind of be both, the bad guy and the good guy. He'd be freeing the enslaved, using the gods' powers against them, which is good, I would argue, but accidentally he'd also be creating a world with hyper-powerful people who, as we've now seen, well, the entire story, let their greed and dark desires hurt all the people around them and leading to, submission and terror and all that stuff that Luffy seems to be fighting. So it kind of begs the question here, how would all of this pan out in the actual show? How would the gods as actual characters magically return to the world? Well, I do think I might know a answer to this. At least I do have a tale to spin that could work in my mind with everything that we've gotten recently. These gods wouldn't have a magical return button because I don't think they ever left. I personally love the idea that currently in the One Piece world, all of the gods have either been captured, killed, or are at least being controlled in various forms. Now, as I've hinted at throughout this entire video so far, something that I really think could be revealed is that Imu has captured all the other gods and is trying to harness their powers. This would be the perfect way for the series to reintroduce all of these figures during the Third World, fulfilling, of course, the Harley text's final line that they will surely meet again now. It will be the moment that all four gods are released, or better yet, unleashed upon the world. Let's just say that powers have always felt incredibly odd to me, in my opinion, because there's just so much surrounding them that pulls from such different places. Like, seriously, what the heck is even the Abyss? It's got magic circles and pentagrams attached to it, and it lets people teleport around the world. How does that tie into the Domi Reversi or that magical book that Imu pulls out, right? Like, pulls random stuff out of that, I don't know. And where does the weapon or power that destroyed Lucia come into here? That thing rained hellfire from the sky and destroyed an entire island, which is just like a totally different vibe from turning people into demons and tattoos that lets you teleport. Not to mention, by the way, that there's the power that Imu grants to the Gorosei, letting them become giant yokai and mythical beasts. Plus, we do know that Imu has given incredibly powerful devil fruits to the Holy Knights, and Imu can even put their own consciousness inside of a vessel remotely, like we see with Gunko. Then they live on top of a giant artificial continent, this huge chunk of earth, but they also inside their flower garden with the nature stuff. The themes are all over the place, I hope we can agree. But I do think their motives, the Earth God plans, have been shown to us through all this. We do know that Imu's gonna start a final big war and was waiting for the Mother Flame to be finished first in order to do so. And this would give us all three possible powers of the other gods in their possession, implying, at least to me, that Imu is wielding the other deities' abilities in the modern era. Again, either they were human and became a god, that would then mean they included the Earth God in this, or they might just be the Earth God. But the Abyss, as I said earlier, it could be tied to the Sea God and or Davy Jones. You know, this dark abyssal part of the ocean is the very same thing that Imu is currently raising to flood the world again. So if they have the sea or the rain god powers, this would be a smart move for them. And considering that the power that destroyed Lucia rained from the sky and raised the sea level afterwards, I think we've got a pretty decent tie between Imu and the Sea God. But Imu also seems to harness the power of the Forest God through their devil fruits. Time and time again, we do see Imu and the world government gathering powerful devil fruits and using them as rewards to boost their army's powers. Imu may have actually even built their kingdom on top of the original devil fruit tree, the Eve tree. Eve, as a biblical figure, is tied to eating the fruit of forbidden knowledge. I mean, we've all been speculating that this tree has been tied to devil fruits, and seeing as the forest god brought forth devils, the idea that they use the Eve tree to do so feels pretty much on the nose, which would explain why geographically the Eve tree is below Morijoa somewhere, and Imu built their kingdom on the tree that gave birth to all these powerful artifacts, protecting it or preventing more of the devil fruits from growing, since it seems that they are now contained in the red line within Earth. And now we've got Imu using the artificial mother flame to either power some ancient weapon or something like that. It's very clear to me that this is a recreation, an artificial version of the forbidden sun talked about in the Harley text, right? This is the power of Nika recreated by a genius scientist, Dr. Vegapunk. Probably not as potent or the true power of the eternal flame, but I think it gets the job done for now and completes the theme of Imu using all the other gods' powers, or all 4 powers if they were originally human. And by the way, this works perfectly with Nika's death and reincarnation, because his power was actually just the other power source of the other gods, it seems. So it does seem like Luffy might be responsible for uniting the 4 gods again by freeing them from Imu's control so they can use the sun to bring destruction to the third world. Destruction that will then lead to rebirth, the new dawn that sees the gods surely meet again as they help craft the next world without the Earth gods or Imu's interference, you know, building it from the scratch up, bringing civilization once again, creating paradise. Once again, tying into all the Adam-Eve biblical stuff, right? The forbidden sun could be the connecting thread that gives all the gods their powers, and that's why Luffy needs to either recreate it or find whatever it is. Now, my guess is that unless Luffy is the eternal flame himself, it would probably on Laugh Tale, right? If it's there and it's deactivated, Luffy has purpose and a clear-cut goal to complete that which his predecessors, Joy Boy and Nika, couldn't quite pull off. And that might just be the secret behind their titles. It's the same reason the Sun God is used in quotations in a Harley text, because since Nika wasn't the god of the sun, Joy Boy, the Harley seems to imply, was never a god of the sun either. They were men who used the sun for the sake of the people, humans, or the other races also, creating this myth of the sun god, which kind of, you know, got in a lot of different directions. Meaning that the sun god is truly just a title for a regular person who used the sun for the people, unlike the other gods who used the sun's powers to harvest the world, flood the war, grow devil fruits, whatever, right? But that again raises a whole different question, the biggest of it all. What is the Forbidden Sun then? Is it literally a giant star, or is it just a parallel for a power similar to it? Well, if you want to find out, you can check out this video right here where I break down all the options that I see that the Eternal Flame could actually be the Forbidden Sun. Otherwise, as always, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much to all of our awesome Patreons. This was a longer one, but a lot of fun. As you know, I love the God videos, so let me know if you want to see more, and I will see you in the next video or over on Patreon.